Tension filled the boardroom as every eye fixed on the projection screen. Morgan Chase leaned toward the employee sitting beside her, whispering sharply in his ear, "Peek one more time, and you're fired." The man, a single father newly hired as an assistant, simply smirked in response. The entire room held its breath, expecting him to stammer apologies or show embarrassment. Instead, he replied calmly, "I'm visually impaired. Trust me." The boardroom fell completely silent, a single sentence that would open a story no one could have imagined. Daniel Foster's fingers moved with practiced precision across his Braille keyboard, the subtle clicks barely audible over the hushed voices of executives discussing quarterly projections. 3 years after the construction accident that had stolen most of his sight, he'd rebuilt his life around what remained his 9-year-old daughter Emma, his determination to provide for her and his absolute refusal to be defined by limitations others placed on him. The leather portfolio resting beside his specialized tablet contained the tools of his new reality, adaptive technology that transformed his disability into a different form of ability. The job at Apex Technologies had been nearly impossible to secure. 23 interviews over 8 months, each ending with variations of the same polite rejection. "We're concerned about workplace safety. We're not sure our systems are compatible with your needs." What they meant was simpler. They saw his white cane and assumed incompetence. His mind drifted briefly to Emma, imagining her in school at this moment, probably answering questions with the same confident directness that often startled adults. She'd grown up too fast after Catherine's death and then his accident 6 months later. At 9, she possessed an emotional intelligence that sometimes made Daniel forget she was still a child. Just last night, she'd placed her small hand on his cheek while he helped with her math homework. "Dad, your eyes can't see, but your heart sees more than other people's." The thought warmed him, steadying his nerves as he navigated this new corporate environment where he was the only visually impaired employee among hundreds. Each workstation, hallway, and meeting room had been carefully memorized during his orientation, counting steps and noting landmarks that would help him maintain independence. He'd arrived 30 minutes early this morning to set up his equipment, the same efficiency he'd developed during his engineering days, now applied to the more mundane role of administrative assistant. Morgan Chase entered the boardroom like a force of nature, her crisp footsteps announcing her presence before she spoke. At 30, she commanded Apex Technologies with the kind of decisive leadership that had doubled the company's valuation in 3 years. Daniel recognized her voice from his brief interview, intelligent, impatient, and utterly without tolerance for inefficiency. The business magazines called her a visionary. Former employees on job review sites used less flattering terms. The meeting began with quarterly projections and market analysis. Daniel's fingers flew across his keyboard, taking detailed notes, while his audio software whispered stock prices and data points through his discreet earpiece. Years of practice had made him faster and more accurate than most traditional note-takers. The specialized system he'd developed with Emma's help allowed him to organize information in real time, creating searchable databases rather than simple transcripts. He was completely absorbed in his work when he sensed movement beside him. Morgan had leaned closer, apparently observing his note-taking process with suspicion. Her expensive perfume, something floral with subtle notes of sandalwood, reached him a moment before her whispered accusation. "Peek one more time and you're fired." The words were delivered with ice-cold authority, clearly intended to embarrass him in front of the executive team. Daniel felt every conversation in the room halt as colleagues turned to witness his humiliation. He'd encountered this assumption countless times, that his occasional head movements or the way his hands moved across his equipment indicated he was faking or exaggerating his disability. For a moment, he considered explaining it his adaptive technology, describing how his equipment worked, or detailing the accident that had changed his life. Instead, he did something that surprised even himself. He smiled. The expression was genuine, tinged with the kind of quiet confidence that came from facing far greater challenges than an intimidating CEO. He lifted his head toward Morgan's voice with the calm assurance of someone who had nothing to prove to people who couldn't see beyond their own assumptions. "I'm visually impaired," he said simply, his voice carrying clearly across the silent boardroom. "Trust me." The two words hung in the air like a challenge. Daniel heard Morgan's sharp intake of breath, felt the collective tension of 20 executives who suddenly realized they'd witnessed something unexpected. He'd just done what no one ever did to Morgan Chase, called her bluff with unshakable composure. Daniel returned to his note-taking as if nothing had happened, his fingers resuming their practiced dance across the keyboard. But something had shifted in the room's atmosphere. The whispered conversations didn't resume immediately, and he could feel eyes watching him with new curiosity rather than dismissive judgment. For the first time since his accident, Daniel wondered if he'd found a place where his abilities might matter more than his limitations. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes, executives discussing product launches and market strategies, while Daniel documented every word. When the room finally cleared, Morgan's voice stopped him as he reached for his white cane. "Mr. Foster, a word, please." Her tone had shifted from sharp accusation to something more controlled, though equally intense. Daniel had expected this. The direct confrontation, the demand for explanations, possibly even termination, despite his first-day status. He'd been fired before for making employers uncomfortable, for challenging their assumptions about disability and capability. "Of course, Ms. Chase," he replied, settling back into his chair with the calm confidence that had carried him through 3 years of rebuilding his life. Morgan waited until they were alone before speaking. "I owe you an apology." The words weren't what Daniel had expected. In his experience, powerful people rarely acknowledge mistakes, especially to subordinates they just publicly humiliated. "Your assumption was understandable. Many people aren't familiar with adaptive workplace technology." Daniel kept his tone neutral, professional, rather than accusatory. "That's generous, but we both know I was out of line. Your personnel file mentioned visual impairment, but I hadn't taken time to understand what that meant practically." Morgan's voice carried a note of professional acknowledgement rather than personal warmth, but Daniel heard genuine regret beneath the formal tone. Most people don't. They hear visually impaired and assume either complete darkness or complete fabrication. The reality is usually more complicated. "Explain it to me." The request was direct, businesslike, but Daniel sensed genuine curiosity rather than administrative obligation. "I have approximately 15% vision remaining in my left eye, enough to distinguish light and shadow, some basic shapes and movement. My right eye was damaged beyond repair in the accident." "Construction accident?" Morgan was clearly referencing his file. "3 years ago. Concrete beam failure during a system inspection. I was an IT engineer specializing in safety systems for construction firms. The irony doesn't escape me." Daniel's tone remained matter-of-fact, the way he'd learned to discuss the accident with Emma when she asked questions. "The safety equipment prevented fatal injuries, but debris damaged my optic nerves. You have a daughter, Emma, 9 years old. She's been my motivation for learning these new systems. Hard to help with homework when you can't see traditional text, so I mastered audio-to-text conversion and braille displays pretty quickly." Daniel smiled slightly, thinking of Emma's patient attempts to describe her art projects or explain math problems they worked through together. "She's become quite the teacher herself." "That must be challenging." "Everything's challenging at first," Daniel replied. "But people adapt. Emma learned to describe things more vividly. I learned to listen more carefully, and we found new ways to connect. Sometimes limitations force you to discover capabilities you didn't know you had." The observation seemed to resonate with Morgan. Though Daniel couldn't see her expression to confirm his impression, he heard her shift in her chair, the soft rustle of fabric suggesting she was leaning forward with interest rather than preparing to dismiss him. "Your note-taking today was remarkably thorough," she said, "more detailed than most assistants manage. Audio processing and voice-to-text conversion allows me to capture verbatim transcripts while simultaneously organizing key points by topic." Daniel explained, "I can have formatted meeting minutes ready for distribution within 20 minutes of adjournment, complete with action items and follow-up assignments." "Show me." Daniel opened his tablet, navigating through practice finger movements across the screen. His voice control software responded to quiet commands, pulling up the meeting transcript and displaying it in large text that Morgan could read, while audio software provided him with the same information through his earpiece. "This is comprehensive," Morgan said, scanning the document. "You've organized statements by speaker, categorized decisions by department, and flagged items requiring follow-up. Most assistants take days to produce minutes, this detailed. Efficiency was essential in my previous career. When you're managing information systems with multiple safety protocols, accurate documentation prevents costly mistakes." Daniel minimized the application and turned toward Morgan's voice. I apply the same principles to administrative work. Morgan's phone buzzed against the conference table, but surprisingly, she ignored it. In Daniel's experience, powerful executives never ignored calls during conversations with subordinates. Her continued attention felt significant. "Why administrative work?" she asked. "With your technical background, there must be IT positions better suited to your qualifications." The question touched on territory Daniel usually avoided discussing with employers. But something in Morgan's tone suggested genuine interest rather than invasive curiosity. Construction sites aren't particularly accommodating to visual impairments. Safety regulations and insurance liability made returning to fieldwork impractical. Office-based IT positions required visual interface with multiple monitors and complex graphics that my adaptive technology couldn't fully access at the time. "So you chose administrative work." "I chose work that would allow me to support my daughter while utilizing skills I could still perform effectively," Daniel corrected gently. "Administrative work isn't a consolation prize. It's a strategic choice that matches my current capabilities with meaningful contribution." The phone buzzed again more insistently. This time Morgan glanced at it with obvious reluctance. "I need to take this," she said. "But Mr. Foster, Daniel, I want to continue this conversation. Would you be available for lunch later this week? I'd like to better understand how to optimize your role here and ensure you have the resources needed for success." The invitation surprised Daniel. Business lunches weren't typically extended to first-day administrative assistants, especially after public confrontations about their capabilities. "Of course," he replied. "I appreciate the opportunity." "Good. Thursday, 12:30. Rossetti's on 5th. And Daniel, your work today was exemplary. I look forward to seeing what other assumptions you might challenge." As her footsteps receded toward the door, Daniel remained seated, processing an interaction that had evolved far beyond his expectations. For the first time since his accident, he sensed that someone in authority saw his adaptations as strengths rather than accommodations, his different approach as valuable rather than problematic. The apartment Daniel shared with Emma was modest but meticulously organized. Every item had its precise location, allowing him to navigate the space with confidence. Emma had helped create a system of textured labels and strategic placement that transformed their home into a space where his disability rarely felt limiting. The kitchen cabinets contained dishes grouped by function, the refrigerator shelves were divided into zones Emma had helped designate, and the living room furniture remained in fixed positions that created clear pathways. "Daddy, Mrs. Peterson was watching us again this morning when you walked me to the bus stop," Emma's voice carried from the small dining table where she was completing her homework. "She had that worried face she always makes when you use your cane." Daniel sighed as he stirred the pasta sauce. Mrs. Peterson, their well-meaning but intrusive neighbor, had appointed herself as unofficial guardian of their welfare. Her constant offers of help thinly disguised her belief that a visually impaired single father couldn't possibly manage childcare adequately. "Mrs. Peterson means well, sweetheart. She just doesn't understand that we have our own systems that work for us. I tried to tell her that you're the best dad ever and that you can do everything other dads can do just differently. But she just made that smile adults do when they think kids don't know anything." Daniel chuckled, recognizing Emma's perfect description of the condescending expression he could no longer see but remembered well. "Some people need time to adjust their expectations. Remember how your art teacher was surprised when she saw how we worked on your projects together. And now she says our way is better because we focus more on textures and feelings instead of just how things look." Emma's pride was evident in her voice. "That's what I mean about your heart, seeing more than other people's eyes." Daniel paused, the simple profundity of her observation striking him deeply. It was moments like these when he realized how much Emma's perspective had been shaped by their shared challenges. While he sometimes worried about the burden his disability placed on her childhood, she seemed to have developed a wisdom and empathy beyond her years. "How was your day at school?" he asked, bringing their plates to the table, navigating by memory and the subtle sounds of Emma shifting in her chair. "We're studying planets. I got to be Jupiter in the class model because I knew all the facts about the Great Red Spot, and—" Her voice dropped slightly, a subtle change that instantly alerted Daniel to something troubling. "Tyler asked if you were really blind or just pretending." Daniel set down his fork, giving Emma his full attention. "What did you say?" "I told him you can see a little bit with one eye, but not enough to read or drive or stuff like that, and that you have special computers that help you work. Then he asked if that's why mom isn't with us anymore, because you can't see. The innocent cruelty of children never ceased to surprise Daniel. And what did you tell him? I told him that mom died when I was little and it had nothing to do with your eyes, and that we take care of each other just fine. Her voice strengthened with certainty. Then Ms. Martinez heard and told Tyler that families come in all different ways and that he shouldn't ask rude questions. That was a good answer, Em, very grown up. I know. Her chair creaked as she shifted. Dad, do you ever wish you could see like before? The question hung between them, and Emma rarely asked directly, though Daniel knew it often occupied her thoughts. Sometimes, he answered honestly. Mostly when I think about seeing your face clearly again, watching you grow up. But wishing doesn't change reality. And we've built a pretty amazing life with things as they are, haven't we? The best life? Emma agreed, her tone brightening. And anyway, I'm really good at describing things. Like today, the sunset was orange and pink with these long purple clouds that look like stretched out cotton candy. And the trees across the street are turning yellow at the very tops, but still green at the bottom. Daniel smiled, grateful for her detailed descriptions that had become their daily ritual. I can see it perfectly when you describe it that way. Now finish your homework while I clean up, and then we can work on your planet project. Their evening routine continued with the comfortable rhythm they'd established over years of adaptation. Emma read aloud from her science textbook while Daniel used his phone's accessibility features to research additional facts about Jupiter. Together, they created a textured model of the planet using materials Daniel could feel and Emma could see their different perspectives combining to create something neither could have made alone. By the time Emma was tucked into bed, Daniel felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction that defined his life as a single parent with a disability. He sat in the living room with his laptop, the screen reader's mechanical voice quietly reciting work emails as he prepared for his second day at Apex Technologies. One message caught his attention, a meeting invitation from Sarah Thompson, Director of Human Resources, scheduled for tomorrow morning. The subject line read, "Accommodation Review." Daniel's stomach tightened with the familiar anxiety of having to justify his capabilities yet again. Experience had taught him that HR meetings often meant someone had complained or questioned his ability to perform his job. His phone buzzed with a text message from a number he didn't recognize. "This is Morgan Chase, confirming lunch Thursday at Rossetti's. Please let me know if you have any dietary restrictions or accessibility concerns the restaurant should address." The formal tone was softened by the consideration shown in the last sentence, something most people wouldn't think to ask. Daniel replied, thanking her and confirming he had no special requirements. As he set down his phone, he wondered what had prompted Morgan's interest. Was it professional curiosity, administrative due diligence, or something more personal? Whatever her motivation, the lunch represented an opportunity to change perceptions at the highest level of the company. He closed his laptop and moved through the nighttime routine he'd perfected, checking locks and thermostats by touch, navigating the familiar landscape of his home in near darkness that made little difference to his limited vision. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, in the quiet apartment with Emma sleeping safely down the hall, Daniel allowed himself to feel something he hadn't experienced in his professional life for 3 years: cautious optimism. The Human Resources office smelled of coffee and artificial pine air freshener. Daniel sat across from Sarah Thompson, hearing the subtle sounds of her fidgeting with a pen as she reviewed documents on her desk. His cane rested against his chair, a visible symbol of the very thing they were discussing. "Mr. Foster, I want to be clear that this meeting is standard procedure for all employees with accommodation needs. We're committed to ensuring you have everything necessary to perform your role effectively." Her voice was carefully neutral, professional, without warmth. The incident in yesterday's executive meeting, however, raises some concerns about communication protocols. Daniel maintained his composure, having anticipated this direction. "By incident, I assume you're referring to the misunderstanding with Ms. Chase." "Yes, while Ms. Chase has acknowledged her error, the situation highlights potential challenges in workplace interactions. Some executives have expressed concern about how your condition might affect team dynamics." There it was, the familiar transformation of his disability into a workplace problem to be managed. My visual impairment doesn't affect my ability to complete assigned tasks. As for team dynamics, clear communication and education usually address any initial discomfort colleagues might feel. Sarah's chair creaked as she leaned forward. Of course, that's why I've scheduled a sensitivity training session for next week. But there's also the matter of a reporting structure. Given Ms. Chase's interest in your accommodation needs, we're considering whether your position might be better suited under James Parker in IT, rather than direct reporting to the executive office. Daniel recognized the careful phrasing for what it was, an attempt to distance him from the executive team where his disability might be more visible and potentially uncomfortable. My current role supports the executive office specifically because of my documentation skills. Moving me to IT would underutilize those capabilities and potentially disrupt workflows already established. Mr. Foster, this isn't about capability, it's about appropriate placement. Sarah's tone had sharpened slightly. Additionally, Ms. Chase has requested a one-on-one lunch meeting with you, which raises concerns about professional boundaries. The implication was clear. Morgan's interest was being interpreted as potentially inappropriate or problematic. Ms. Chase expressed interest in better understanding how to optimize my role and ensure I have necessary resources. That seems entirely appropriate for a CEO concerned with employee effectiveness. A knock at the door interrupted them. The door opened and Daniel recognized James Parker's voice. Sorry to interrupt, Sarah. I was told you wanted to see me about Daniel's position. Yes, James, please join us. Sarah's tone shifted to something more collegial. We're discussing whether Daniel's skills might be better utilized in your department given his technical background. James settled into a chair beside Daniel. I reviewed his resume, impressive experience in systems management, but from what I understand, his current role was specifically created to improve executive documentation processes, which have been problematic for months. That's correct, Sarah acknowledged, but given his disability, his adaptive technology actually makes him more efficient than conventional methods, James interrupted. Morgan forwarded me the meeting minutes he produced yesterday. Frankly, they're the most comprehensive I've seen in my 15 years here. Why would we move someone from a position where they're excelling? The question hung in the air. Daniel felt a surprising sense of alliance with this man he'd barely met. James continued his tone, conversational but firm. My nephew is deaf, works as a sound engineer, believe it or not. Uses specialized equipment that lets him see sound patterns most people can't detect. Won awards for his work. Taught me that different isn't less. Sometimes it's more. Daniel heard Sarah shifting uncomfortably. Of course we're not suggesting Mr. Foster's work is substandard. We're simply concerned about integration and communication challenges. The only communication challenge I witnessed was Morgan assuming something incorrect, being corrected respectfully, and then taking appropriate steps to better understand the situation. James's matter-of-fact assessment cut through the careful corporate language. Seems like the system worked exactly as it should. Daniel sensed the dynamics shifting in the room. James Parker, with his senior position and decades of experience, was effectively blocking the subtle discrimination being couched in terms of appropriate placement and team dynamics. Well, Sarah said finally, if both you and Ms. Chase feel strongly about Mr. Foster's current placement, we'll maintain the existing arrangement. But I still have concerns about the lunch meeting. It's unusual for the CEO to take such interest in a new administrative assistant. Morgan takes interest in anything that improves efficiency, James replied, and anyone who stands up to her with facts rather than intimidation. Those are rare qualities she respects. The meeting concluded with Sarah reluctantly agreeing to keep Daniel in his current position while monitoring the situation. As they left her office, James spoke quietly to Daniel. Jason Mills from accounting has been complaining about your equipment taking up extra space in the shared workroom. Ignore him. He complained about the coffee machine being too loud last month. Thank you for your support in there, Daniel said, as they walked down the hallway, his cane tapping lightly against the floor. It's not always easy to find allies in new workplaces. I meant what I said about my nephew. Watching how people treated him taught me a lot about assumptions and limitations. James paused at the elevator. Morgan doesn't take interest in people unless she sees something valuable. Whatever impressed her yesterday, keep doing it. She doesn't give second chances often, but when she does commit to someone, she's fiercely loyal. The elevator arrived and James stepped inside. One more thing. There's an IT project coming up for adaptive technology integration. When you're settled in, I'd like your input. Your perspective would be valuable. As the elevator doors closed, Daniel stood momentarily still, processing the unexpected alliance and opportunity that had just presented itself. The corporate world he'd navigated since his accident had rarely offered either so readily. The next 2 days passed with a mixture of routine tasks and subtle workplace politics. Daniel became aware of the whispered conversations that stopped when he approached the curious glances from colleagues trying to assess his capabilities and the occasional uncomfortable silence when someone wasn't sure how to interact with him. These were familiar challenges in new environments, and he navigated them with practiced patience. On Thursday morning, he received a message from Morgan's assistant confirming their lunch appointment and providing detailed directions to Rossetti's. The level of considerations, including information about the restaurant's layout and entrance accessibility, suggested Morgan had specifically requested these details be included. Rossetti's was not what Daniel expected. Rather than the formal corporate dining room he'd anticipated, the restaurant had the intimate atmosphere of a family-owned establishment. Soft classical music conversations held at comfortable volumes and staff who guided him to the table with respectful assistance rather than uncomfortable hovering. Morgan was already seated when he arrived, her voice rising slightly in greeting. "You're precisely on time. Punctuality is underappreciated these days. A habit developed during my job search. Arriving early gives me time to orient myself in new environments." Daniel settled into his chair, subtly exploring the table settings with his fingertips. "I took the liberty of requesting menus in both Braille and standard print. They're preparing one now." The consideration surprised him. Most people didn't think about such details. "The waiter will describe today's specials when he returns." "Thank you, that's thoughtful. It's practical." Efficiency requires addressing obvious needs directly rather than pretending they don't exist. Morgan's matter-of-fact tone stripped the accommodation of any potential awkwardness. "I hope you don't mind, but I've ordered a bottle of sparkling water for the table. I don't drink alcohol at business lunches." "Neither do I, especially since my accident. Alcohol affects my remaining vision and spatial orientation." The waiter arrived with menus, including one with Braille overlay that allowed Daniel to review options independently. After they ordered, Morgan shifted the conversation from pleasantries to purpose with characteristic directness. "Your summary of the Nexus project was remarkably insightful. You identified integration challenges our development team has been downplaying for months." Her tone conveyed genuine appreciation. "Most importantly, you presented problems alongside potential solutions rather than simply highlighting obstacles." That approach was standard in my previous role. Safety systems require identifying failure points before they become critical. Daniel took a sip of water. "The timeline concerns me most. The architecture is sound, but the implementation schedule doesn't account for integration testing across different platforms. Exactly my assessment, though the project leads insist otherwise." Morgan seemed pleased by their aligned thinking. "This is precisely why I wanted to discuss expanding your role. Your technical background combined with your documentation skills creates a valuable perspective most executives lack." "I'm interested, but I should be transparent about my limitations. Complex visual interfaces remain challenging even with my adaptive technology. Certain aspects of project management would require modifications to standard workflows. Modifications that might benefit everyone, not just you." Morgan's response came without hesitation. "I've been reviewing your personnel file and research on adaptive workplace technologies. Many of the tools you use could improve efficiency for all employees, regardless of ability status." The conversation paused as their food arrived. Daniel navigated his plate with practiced movements, having developed techniques that allowed him to dine independently without drawing attention. He noticed Morgan didn't fill conversational space with unnecessary talk. Another unexpected consideration that made the interaction more comfortable. "May I ask what prompted your interest in adaptive technologies?" Most executives don't personally involve themselves in accommodation details. Daniel kept his tone curious rather than challenging. "3 factors. First, practical business interest. Inefficient processes waste resources regardless of why they exist. Second, competitive advantage. Diverse perspectives lead to better innovation. Third," she paused, her voice shifting almost imperceptibly, Personal experience. My younger brother has dyslexia. I watched him struggle with educational systems designed for neurotypical students, then excel when given appropriate tools. The personal disclosure was unexpected from someone with Morgan's carefully maintained professional persona. That experience shapes perspectives in ways theoretical knowledge can't. Precisely, which brings me to my proposal. Morgan's voice returned to its businesslike efficiency. I want to create a new position, technical documentation specialist reporting directly to me. You would review project specifications, translate technical requirements into executive summaries, and identify potential integration challenges before they become critical failures. The opportunity aligned perfectly with Daniel's skills while accommodating his disability. That sounds ideal, but wouldn't creating a new position raise questions? I've already noticed some concern about your interest in my work. Office politics. Morgan dismissed the issue with audible disdain. Robert Hamilton and Sarah Thompson believe I'm letting personal factors influence business decisions. They're partially correct. I personally value efficiency and competence, which influence every business decision I make. Daniel appreciated her directness. And the fact that you're creating a position for someone with a disability doesn't concern you from a perception standpoint. I'm creating a position that leverages specific skills to address an existing business need. Your disability is relevant only insofar as it's contributed to the development of those skills. Morgan's voice carried absolute conviction. Anyone who sees it differently is revealing their own biases, not mine. The statement resonated with Daniel's own philosophy about his condition. I don't view these adaptations as limitations, but as different skills, like learning another language. Exactly. Different tools for different needs. Morgan seemed to appreciate the analogy. Now there's something else I wanted to discuss. Your daughter, Emma. You mentioned she's 9. The shift in topic surprised Daniel. Yes, 4th grade, extremely bright, especially in science. You're raising her alone since your wife passed away. The question approached personal territory Daniel rarely discussed with colleagues, but Morgan's tone conveyed genuine interest rather than invasive curiosity. Yes, Catherine died of cancer when Emma was 4. 6 months before my accident, actually. We were dealing with both her illness and the aftermath of my injury simultaneously. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was. Catherine was worried about leaving Emma with a father who was still learning to navigate his own limitations. Daniel's voice softened with the memory. She spent her last months teaching me things she'd always handled. Braiding hair, explaining girl drama, talking through emotions I wasn't equipped to understand. Morgan listened with complete attention, her usual multitasking apparently set aside. How do you balance that with your own needs? The healing process can't have been easy. The question demonstrated insight Daniel hadn't expected. Most people focused on practical logistics, childcare finances, daily routines. Morgan was asking about emotional sustainability. Some days better than others. Emma's resilience helps. She accepted changes as they came, rather than mourning what was lost. Her attitude taught me to focus on what we were building together rather than what we'd left behind. She sounds remarkable. She is. She's participating in the district science fair next month with a model of Jupiter she designed with both visual and tactile elements so we could work on it together. Daniel found himself sharing details he wouldn't normally discuss in a professional context. She wants us to present it together to demonstrate how different perspectives can create something better than either could alone. That's an insightful approach for a 9-year-old. I'd like to meet her sometime. The statement seemed to surprise Morgan herself as she quickly added, if that wouldn't be inappropriate, of course. Emma would love that. She's been asking when she gets to meet the important people from Daddy's work. Daniel smiled at the thought of his daughter's enthusiasm. She'd probably quiz you about your job and offer suggestions for improving your business operations. I'd welcome her perspective. Children often see solutions adults miss because they're not constrained by assumptions about how things should work. Morgan's tone softened momentarily before returning to its professional efficiency. Speaking of operations, I should outline the specifics of the position I'm proposing. The remainder of lunch focused on practical details, reporting structure, compensation, and performance metrics for the new role. As they walked back toward the Apex building, Daniel found himself matching Morgan's pace naturally, their conversation continuing without the awkward silences that often accompanied his professional relationships. She seemed comfortable with his white cane's rhythm, neither rushing ahead nor slowing unnecessarily. "Daniel," Morgan said as they approached the lobby entrance, "would you and Emma like to join me for dinner this weekend? Somewhere family-friendly, obviously. I realize it's unconventional for a CEO to socialize with employees outside work events, but I genuinely enjoy our conversation and would like to continue it in a more relaxed setting." The invitation crossed professional boundaries Daniel had never expected anyone in leadership to traverse. Morgan's tone suggested personal interest rather than corporate obligation, genuine curiosity about his life rather than strategic relationship building. "Emma would love that," Daniel said, "and so would I." "Perfect. I'll have my assistant coordinate details with you." As they parted ways in the lobby, Daniel realized that his initial assessment of Morgan Chase had been as incomplete as her assumptions about his capabilities. Behind the formidable CEO was someone capable of genuine curiosity, personal growth, and apparently friendship that transcended corporate hierarchies. For the first time since returning to work, Daniel felt like he'd found not just employment, but connection with someone who saw his adaptations as strengths rather than limitations. The lunch had revealed depths in both of them that neither had expected to share with a workplace acquaintance. As he returned to his desk, Daniel became aware of whispered conversations that stopped abruptly as he approached. Jason Mills' voice carried slightly louder than the others. "3-hour lunch with the CEO on your third day. Must be nice to get special treatment." Daniel chose not to engage, focusing instead on the technical documentation waiting in his inbox. The office politics James had warned about were already emerging, but they seemed insignificant compared to the opportunity Morgan had offered. A role that would utilize his full capabilities rather than minimizing them to fit conventional expectations. Bruno's Family Pizzeria buzzed with weekend energy as Daniel navigated between tables following the hostess's general directions. The restaurant's layout was simple enough to memorize quickly. A central pathway with booths lining both sides, the scent of garlic and tomato sauce, creating an invisible guide through the space. Emma walked slightly ahead, announcing each obstacle with the practiced awareness of a child accustomed to being her father's occasional guide. "There's a high chair sticking out on the right, Daddy, and the floor gets sticky by the soda machine." Her narration was subtle enough that most wouldn't notice, delivered like casual conversation rather than assistance. Daniel detected Morgan's presence before Emma, the subtle fragrance of her perfume distinct from the restaurant's culinary aromas. She'd arrived early, something he hadn't expected from someone whose time was presumably measured in thousands of dollars per hour. Emma spotted her simultaneously. "Is that Ms. Chase at the corner booth? The lady in the blue dress?" "I believe so." Daniel smiled at his daughter's excitement. She'd spent the morning deliberating over her outfit and preparing what she called important business questions. Morgan rose as they approached her, greeting warmer than her office persona. "You must be Emma. Your father has told me about your Jupiter project." Emma's hand squeezed Daniel's briefly before she stepped forward with the confidence that continually amazed him. "It's nice to meet you, Ms. Chase. Daddy says you're the boss of his whole building. That must be really hard work. Do you get to make all the decisions?" The directness of the question broke through Morgan's professional reserve, eliciting a genuine laugh. "Most of them, but the best bosses listen to smart people before making important choices. Your father gives excellent advice." Emma beamed with pride as they settled into the booth. "He's really smart. He taught me that being different doesn't mean being less good at things. It just means you do things in your own special way." The simple wisdom delivered with 9-year-old certainty seemed to resonate with Morgan more deeply than Daniel had expected. The subtle shift in her breathing suggested she was processing Emma's perspective on adaptation and resilience with unexpected interest. "That's a very insightful way of looking at things," Morgan replied, her usual clipped efficiency softening. "Is that how you approach your school projects?" Emma launched into an enthusiastic explanation of her Jupiter model, describing how they'd created textured surfaces to represent atmospheric bands and storm systems that Daniel could feel while she handled the visual elements. Morgan listened with complete attention, asking questions that revealed genuine interest rather than adult condescension. "So you both contributed different skills based on your different ways of seeing," Morgan summarized when Emma paused for breath. "That's actually an excellent model for effective teamwork in any context." "That's what my teacher said. She wants us to present it together at the science fair to show how different perspectives make better projects. Emma's excitement was palpable. Do you have people with different perspectives on your teams at work? The question might have seemed precocious from another child, but Emma had grown up discussing workplace dynamics with Daniel, absorbing concepts about diversity and inclusion that most adults barely comprehended. Morgan seemed momentarily startled by the sophisticated inquiry coming from a 9-year-old. Not as many as we should, she admitted with surprising candor. That's something I'm working to change. The conversation flowed with unexpected ease throughout dinner. Morgan gradually shedding the polished corporate persona that Daniel had assumed was her only mode of interaction. She answered Emma's questions about running a technology company with thoughtful consideration, explaining complex concepts in accessible terms without talking down to her. By the time they were sharing dessert, a massive ice cream sundae that Emma had insisted they needed to experience, the atmosphere felt remarkably comfortable. Daniel found himself sharing stories about Emma's early childhood and their adjustments after his accident, topics he rarely discussed with anyone outside their immediate circle. After the accident, I was terrified of failing her. He admitted the vulnerability surprising even himself. Catherine had been gone just 6 months, and suddenly I couldn't see Emma's artwork or read her bedtime stories the way I always had. What did you do? Morgan's question carried genuine curiosity. We invented new ways to share those experiences. Emma would describe her drawings in extraordinary detail, and we found books with tactile elements I could follow along with my fingers while reading the Braille overlay. Emma nodded enthusiastically. And now we have our special good-night routine where I describe the sunset every evening before bed. Daddy says I help him see with words. You do, sweetheart. Better than any technology. The emotion in Daniel's voice was impossible to disguise. Morgan was quiet for a moment, seemingly processing this glimpse into their relationship. You've created something remarkable together. A partnership built on mutual support rather than limitation. The observation struck Daniel as unusually perceptive. Most people viewed his relationship with Emma through the lens of sacrifice, a child forced to grow up too quickly to accommodate her father's disability. Morgan had immediately recognized the reciprocity and strength at its core. As they prepared to leave, Emma excused herself to visit the restroom, leaving Daniel and Morgan momentarily alone. The slight awkwardness of transitioning from professional colleagues to something more personal settled between them. Thank you for including Emma tonight. She doesn't get many opportunities to socialize with my colleagues. Daniel filled the silence with gratitude that was genuine but safe. She's extraordinary, insightful, empathetic, articulate, qualities many adults never develop. Morgan's voice carried a note of something deeper than professional admiration. She reminds me of myself at that age, except with emotional intelligence I didn't acquire until much later, if at all. The personal disclosure hovered between them, neither fully acknowledged nor dismissed. Before Daniel could respond, Emma returned, already launching into a new thread of conversation about the restaurant's ice cream selection and whether they should conduct a systematic comparison of local dessert options. As they parted ways outside the restaurant, Morgan surprised both Daniel and Emma with an unexpected invitation. There's a technology exhibit at the Science Museum next weekend focused on accessibility innovations. Would you both be interested in going? They're showcasing some remarkable advances in adaptive technologies. Emma's excitement was immediate and vocal. Can we go, Daddy? Please. The invitation represented another step across the invisible boundaries, separating work relationships from personal ones. Daniel hesitated, briefly aware of the potential complications. That sounds wonderful. If you're sure it wouldn't be imposing on your weekend. Not at all. I've been meaning to see the exhibit, and experiencing it with someone who uses adaptive technology daily would be particularly valuable. Morgan's explanation was practical, maintaining plausible professional interests, while the warmth in her voice suggested something more personal. They confirmed details, and as Morgan's car pulled away from the curb, Emma slipped her hand into Daniel's with a satisfied sigh. I like her, Daddy. She doesn't talk to me like I'm a baby, and she looks at you like she sees the real you. Not just your eyes. The observation, delivered with a child's unfiltered honesty, lingered in Daniel's thoughts long after Emma had fallen asleep that night. Morgan Chase was becoming something he hadn't anticipated when he accepted the position at Apex Technologies. not just an employer or even an ally, but possibly a friend. The implications of that shift, both personally and professionally, were complex and potentially fraught with complications. Monday morning brought a sharp return to corporate reality. As Daniel stepped off the elevator, the usual murmur of office conversation died briefly before resuming at a noticeably lower volume. Jason Mills stood near the coffee station with two colleagues, their posture and sudden silence making it clear they had been discussing him. James Parker intercepted Daniel before he reached his desk. "Heads up, Robert Hamilton is in Morgan's office. Sarah Thompson is with them. Closed-door meeting for the past 30 minutes. The implication was clear. The dinner with Morgan had accelerated whatever concerns Sarah had raised previously. "Thanks for the warning. Any idea what specifically triggered this? Someone saw you all at the pizza place Saturday night. Office gossip travels at light speed, especially when it involves the CEO. James kept his voice low. Hamilton has always been conservative about internal relationships. He's from the old school of corporate hierarchy where executives don't fraternize with staff. Daniel nodded, processing this new complication. The dinner was Morgan's idea. She wanted to meet Emma after hearing about her science project. Your daughter was there too. James seemed surprised. That actually might help. Makes it more of a family-friendly outing than anything that could be misinterpreted. He glanced toward Morgan's office. Just be prepared. Hamilton may want to speak with you directly. The warning proved prescient. Within an hour, Sarah Thompson appeared at Daniel's desk, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. Mr. Foster, Mr. Hamilton would like a few minutes of your time. He's in the small conference room. Daniel gathered his cane and tablet, maintaining a composed exterior despite the anxiety building beneath the surface. As an administrative assistant, just 1 week into the job, being summoned by the chairman of the board was unprecedented and concerning. Robert Hamilton projected authority without effort, his voice carrying the confident resonance of someone accustomed to power. Mr. Foster, please sit down. I understand you've made quite an impression during your first week. The statement could be interpreted multiple ways, forcing Daniel to respond carefully. I've been focused on performing my duties effectively while adapting to Apex's corporate culture. Yes, your performance has been noted. Ms. Chase speaks highly of your technical insights, which is unusual given her typically critical assessment of new employees. Hamilton's chair creaked as he leaned forward. She's also proposed creating a specialized position reporting directly to her. Again, unusual for someone with your limited tenure. Daniel maintained his composure. The position would leverage my background in systems engineering along with my documentation skills. It addresses a specific need for technical translation between development teams and executive leadership. So I've been told. Hamilton's tone remained neutral, but carried undertones of skepticism. I'm more concerned with the accelerated timeline and the apparent personal interest Ms. Chase has taken in your situation. Socializing outside the office after less than a week of employment raises questions about professional boundaries. The implication was unmistakable. Daniel felt a flash of indignation, but kept his response measured. If you're referring to dinner at Bruno's Pizzeria, that was a family-friendly outing that included my 9-year-old daughter. Ms. Chase expressed interest in meeting Emma after hearing about her science project. Your daughter was present. Something in Hamilton's tone shifted slightly. Yes, Emma has been asking to meet the people I work with. Ms. Chase was kind enough to accommodate that interest in a completely appropriate setting. Hamilton was silent for a moment, apparently recalibrating his assumptions. I see. That context wasn't made clear to me. The subtle accusation toward whoever had reported the dinner, likely Sarah Thompson, hung unspoken between them. Mr. Foster, let me be direct. Apex Technologies maintains certain standards regarding professional relationships, particularly those crossing hierarchical boundaries. While Ms. Chase has considerable autonomy as CEO, the board remains concerned about any situation that might affect company operations or public perceptions. Daniel recognized the corporate speak masking the real concern, that Morgan's interest in him might be personally rather than professionally motivated. I understand your concerns, sir. I can assure you that my interactions with Ms. Chase have been focused on maximizing my contribution to Apex's objectives. Nevertheless, we believe the proposed position reporting directly to Ms. Chase creates an unnecessary appearance of favoritism. The board recommends that if your role is to be expanded, you should report to James Parker in IT, maintaining appropriate organizational distance from the executive office. The recommendation was clearly a mandate. Daniel weighed his response carefully, recognizing the delicate balance between standing his ground and antagonizing someone with the power to terminate his employment. With respect, Mr. Hamilton, the value of the proposed position lies in its direct connection to executive decision-making. Filtering technical assessments through additional management layers would diminish their impact and timeliness. Hamilton's surprise at being challenged was evident in his momentary silence. You seem remarkably confident for someone still in a probationary period, Mr. Foster. I'm confident in my assessment of efficient information flow, sir. It's the same principle that guided my work in safety systems. Critical information needs direct pathways to decision makers without dilution through intermediary interpretations. The tense moment was interrupted by Morgan's unannounced entrance. Her voice carried the controlled anger of someone maintaining professionalism against significant provocation. Robert, when you schedule meetings with my direct reports, professional courtesy suggests notifying me first. Hamilton straightened, clearly irritated by the interruption. Ms. Chase, we were simply clarifying organizational protocols regarding the new position you have proposed. A position that falls under my authority as CEO, not the board's micromanagement. Morgan moved to stand beside Daniel's chair, a subtle but clear statement of alliance. Unless the board is formally challenging my operational decisions, the corporate power struggle crystallized in that moment. Hamilton representing traditional hierarchy and separation, Morgan defending her authority to structure her team as she saw fit. Daniel found himself at the center of a conflict much larger than his individual position. Hamilton rose, signaling the meeting's end. The board has expressed its recommendations. Final decisions remain yours, of course, though I hope you'll consider the broader implications for organizational culture. His departure left a charged silence in the small conference room. Morgan waited until his footsteps faded before speaking. I apologize for that ambush. Sarah has been feeding Robert concerns about inappropriate influence since our lunch meeting. The dinner with Emma escalated his intervention. Daniel shook his head. No need to apologize. Corporate politics exist everywhere. I'm just usually not important enough to be at the center of them. A brief laugh escaped Morgan's genuine amusement, breaking through her professional armor. An admirably pragmatic perspective. Still, you shouldn't have to defend yourself against Robert's insinuations. Actually, Emma's presence seems to have derailed whatever narrative he was constructing. Apparently, bringing my daughter changed the context significantly. Of course it did. Even Robert wouldn't suggest impropriety with a 9-year-old present. Morgan's frustration was evident. This is exactly why I avoid most social interaction with colleagues. Every action gets scrutinized through the most cynical possible lens. The admission explained much about Morgan's reputation for isolation and detachment. For what it's worth, Emma hasn't stopped talking about meeting you. She was particularly impressed by your explanation of market competition using ice cream flavors as an analogy. The tension in Morgan's posture eased slightly. She's a remarkable child, insightful, curious, completely lacking the self-consciousness that limits most adults. Her voice softened. You've done an extraordinary job raising her, especially given the challenges you've both faced. The compliment, delivered with uncharacteristic warmth, created a moment of personal connection amid the corporate conflict. Daniel felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. Recognition from someone who understood the magnitude of what he'd accomplished with Emma meant more than professional accolades. Thank you. That means a great deal coming from someone who recognizes both the challenges and the achievements. Daniel rose, gathering his cane. What happens now with the position? Morgan's professional focus returned seamlessly. I proceed as planned. Robert can make recommendations, but final organizational decisions remain mine. The real question is whether you are willing to accept a role that's clearly going to face scrutiny and resistance from certain quarters. The question was fair. Accepting the position would place Daniel at the center of ongoing corporate politics, making his work life potentially more complicated. Is the position still reporting directly to you? Because if so, I'm absolutely interested, regardless of Robert Hamilton's concerns. It is. I need someone with both technical understanding and the courage to deliver unfiltered assessments. You've demonstrated both qualities repeatedly. Morgan moved toward the door. We'll make the announcement tomorrow. The sooner we normalize the arrangement, the sooner Robert and Sarah will find something else to obsess over. As they exited the conference room, Daniel became acutely aware of the whispered conversations and subtle attention from colleagues throughout the open office area. Word of his meeting with Hamilton had clearly spread, and his emergence with Morgan only fueled the speculation. The coming days would require navigating not just new professional responsibilities, but also the complex social dynamics of being perceived as Morgan's protege or favorite. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity as Daniel's new position was formalized. The announcement generated exactly the mix of reactions he'd anticipated. Genuine congratulations from some colleagues, thinly veiled skepticism from others, and outright resentment from a few who viewed his rapid advancement as evidence of favoritism rather than merit. Jason Mills became particularly vocal in his criticism, making snide comments just loud enough for Daniel to overhear. Must be nice having the CEO in your corner. Some of us have to earn our promotions the old-fashioned way. James Parker proved to be a valuable ally, shutting down the most egregious gossip and publicly endorsing Daniel's qualifications for the new role. Anyone who's seen his technical assessments knows exactly why Morgan created this position. The rest is just noise. By Friday afternoon, Daniel was mentally exhausted from navigating the corporate minefield. When he received a call from Emma's school requesting his presence for an urgent parent-teacher conference on Monday, it felt like one challenge too many. He texted Morgan apologizing for having to reschedule their planned Monday morning project review. Her response came almost immediately. No apology needed. Family takes priority. Is everything all right with Emma? The genuine concern in her message, devoid of the irritation he might have expected from other executives, reinforced his growing appreciation for Morgan's priorities. He explained the situation briefly, mentioning that Emma had been involved in some kind of dispute with a classmate over comments about his disability. Morgan's reply was swift and supportive. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Our museum trip tomorrow is still on if you both feel up to it. The technology exhibit at the National Science Museum stretched across the entire West Wing, showcasing innovations ranging from virtual reality headsets to robotic prosthetics. Daniel navigated the space with practiced confidence, Emma's occasional directional cues providing just enough guidance to complement his cane and spatial memory. Morgan walked beside them, her usual corporate efficiency replaced by genuine curiosity as Emma enthusiastically narrated each display. This one translates visual information into tactile sensations, Emma explained, guiding Daniel's hand to a device that converted camera input into patterns of vibration on the skin. It's like your Braille reader, but for seeing the world instead of just words. Daniel felt the subtle vibrations shift as Emma moved the camera, creating a rudimentary tactile map of their surroundings. The technology was remarkable, but still primitive compared to the nuanced information human vision provided. Interesting concept, but the resolution needs significant improvement. That's exactly what I was thinking, Morgan agreed, examining the technical specifications. The processing speed creates too much latency for practical navigation, but the core concept has potential. Emma beamed at their shared analysis. You both talk about technology the same way, always thinking about how to make it better instead of just saying it's cool. The observation highlighted the unexpected commonalities between Daniel and Morgan that had emerged over the past weeks. Despite their different backgrounds and circumstances, they shared an analytical approach to problem solving and a practical assessment of both possibilities and limitations. As they moved through the exhibit, Daniel became aware of subtle shifts in the dynamics between them. Morgan had begun the day maintaining a careful professional distance, but as hours passed, the boundaries softened. She asked Emma questions about school, offered genuine interest in her science fair preparations, and occasionally touched Daniel's arm to guide him toward interesting displays, the contact lingering just slightly longer than necessary for practical assistance. Near the adaptive computing section, they encountered a demonstration of screen reading software similar to what Daniel used daily. The museum guide, a college student with limited knowledge of the technology, struggled to explain its functionality accurately. Actually, the software doesn't translate images, Daniel corrected gently. It accesses embedded metadata and alternative text descriptions to convey visual content. Without proper tagging, images remain invisible to the user. The guide looked embarrassed. Are you familiar with these systems? I use them daily. Daniel demonstrated by pulling out his phone and activating its accessibility features, navigating through applications with practiced efficiency. Modern systems combine text-to-speech with haptic feedback and spatial audio cues to create a multisensory interface. A small crowd gathered as Daniel explained the practical realities of adaptive technology, its capabilities, limitations, and the critical importance of thoughtful design. Morgan watched with evident pride as he transformed from museum visitor to impromptu expert lecturer, his technical knowledge and lived experience creating a perspective the museum's prepared materials couldn't match. Emma tugged at Morgan's sleeve, whispering just loud enough for her to hear. Daddy's really good at explaining things so everyone understands. He says technology should work for people, not the other way around. Your father has exceptional clarity about what matters in design. Morgan replied, her gaze remaining on Daniel as he fielded questions from increasingly engaged listeners. That's surprisingly rare even among technology professionals. When the crowd finally dispersed, Daniel rejoined them, slightly embarrassed by the attention. Sorry about that. Occupational hazard of living with these systems every day. Don't apologize. You provided more practical insight in 5 minutes than the entire exhibit manages in its wall text. Morgan's admiration was evident. We should incorporate your user perspective into Apex's accessibility initiatives. The engineering team's theoretical understanding clearly misses crucial experiential elements. The suggestion represented another evolution in their relationship. Morgan increasingly viewing Daniel not just as a technical translator, but as a valuable advisor across multiple domains. The professional respect had become a foundation for something deeper, a connection neither had anticipated when they first met in that tense boardroom confrontation. They continued through the exhibit until Emma spotted the museum's planetarium, advertising a special presentation on Jupiter's atmospheric dynamics, perfectly aligned with her science fair project. Can we go, please? It starts in 20 minutes. The timing would extend their outing well into the evening, blurring the boundaries of their museum visit into dinner territory. Daniel hesitated, aware of the potential complications. That's a bit later than we planned. Morgan might have other commitments. Actually, my schedule is completely open. Morgan's response came without hesitation. And the presentation sounds fascinating. Emma can explain how it connects to your tactile model afterward. The planetarium's dome ceiling disappeared into darkness as the presentation began, stars emerging across the simulated night sky. The narrator's voice filled the space, describing Jupiter's swirling cloud bands and massive storms, while high-definition imagery transformed the dome into a close-up view of the gas giant. For most visitors, it was a primarily visual experience. Daniel listened intently to the scientific explanations, building mental models from the detailed descriptions. Beside him, Emma occasionally whispered additional details. The narrator missed her hand resting on his arm as she connected the auditory information to the visual spectacle above them. On his other side, Morgan sat close enough that he could sense her presence. The subtle scent of her perfume, the sound of her breathing, the warmth radiating from her shoulder, nearly touching his. In the darkened planetarium, surrounded by strangers lost in cosmic imagery, Daniel experienced a moment of profound connection that transcended his visual limitations. Emma's whispered descriptions, Morgan's attentive presence, and his own sensory awareness combined to create an experience as rich and meaningful as any sighted person's. For perhaps the first time since his accident, he felt not accommodated, but simply included. Part of something beautiful rather than an exception requiring special consideration. As they exited the planetarium, Emma bounced with excitement, recounting her favorite details about Jupiter's great red spot. And did you know it's been shrinking? The scientists still don't know why. Maybe by the time I'm grown up and working at NASA, I'll figure it out. Morgan laughed, the sound freer and more natural than her careful corporate chuckle. I wouldn't be surprised. You already understand complex systems better than most adults I work with. That's because Daddy teaches me to think about how things connect instead of just memorizing facts. Emma grabbed both their hands, physically linking them as they walked toward the museum exit. Like how the storms on Jupiter affect each other, or how Daddy's screen reader connects to different programs, or how companies like yours make decisions that change how technology works for everyone. The simple physical connection, Emma's small hand holding both theirs, created a tableau that didn't escape the notice of passing museum visitors. To any observer, they appeared to be a family enjoying a weekend outing, a perception that carried implications neither adult had explicitly acknowledged. Outside the museum, the evening air had cooled, and hunger dictated their next decision. "There's a great pizza place 2 blocks from here," Daniel suggested, recognizing that dinner together would further extend their increasingly personal interaction. "Pizza again?" Emma pretended to complain, though her tone made it clear she was teasing. "We had that last time with Ms. Morgan. Actually, there's a restaurant in my building that serves excellent food across preferences. My treat to thank you both for including me today." Morgan's invitation crossed another invisible line in their evolving relationship. Dinner at her residence rather than a neutral public location. Daniel weighed the implications carefully. "That's very generous, but—" "Please, Daddy, I've never seen where Ms. Morgan lives. Does it have a doorman? Do you have a view of the whole city?" Emma's excitement made refusal difficult, especially when the objections stemmed from adult complexities she couldn't fully understand. "It does have a doorman, and yes, the view is quite impressive." Morgan's voice carried a note of uncertainty unusual for her typically decisive communication. "But your father's right to be cautious. Having dinner at my home rather than a restaurant does change the nature of our outing." And the explicit acknowledgement of the boundary they were considering crossing created a moment of honesty between them. Daniel appreciated Morgan's sensitivity to the implications rather than simply leveraging her position or Emma's enthusiasm. A restaurant in your building still maintains appropriate context, and Emma would love seeing a new part of the city. The decision made, they traveled to Morgan's Riverside Drive building, an elegant pre-war structure with the understated luxury of old New York money rather than flashy modern wealth. The doorman greeted Morgan by name, his professional demeanor warming slightly when he noticed Emma. "Good evening, Ms. Chase. Will your guests need anything special for dinner?" "Just a table at Meridian Thomas, the corner one by the windows if it's available." Morgan guided them through the marble-floored lobby toward the restaurant, situated on the building's ground floor. "I live on the top floor, Emma, but the view from here is actually better for seeing the city lights across the river." The restaurant exemplified refined, casual elegance, white tablecloths and quality stemware without the stuffiness of formal dining. As they settled at a corner table overlooking the Hudson River, Emma pressed her face against the window, entranced by the lights of New Jersey sparkling across the water. It's like stars fell into the river. Their dinner conversation flowed with surprising ease, professional topics giving way to personal histories and shared interests. Morgan described growing up with parents who valued achievement above emotional connection, her brother's learning differences becoming the catalyst for her interest in accessibility. Daniel shared stories from his engineering days, technical challenges that had prepared him for the more fundamental adaptations his accident would later require. Emma contributed her unique perspective on both their worlds, her observations often cutting through adult complexities with disarming clarity. "It's funny how grown-ups make everything so complicated. Daddy needed a job where he could use his brain since his eyes don't work so well. You needed someone who understands both computers and people. It's like a puzzle where the pieces fit perfectly, but everyone keeps saying the puzzle shouldn't be put together." The innocent assessment of their situation brought shared laughter and a moment of recognition. Perhaps the barriers between them existed more in external expectations than in their own experience. As their meal concluded, Emma's energy finally began to wane, her excitement giving way to the fatigue of a long, stimulating day. "I think someone's ready to head home," Daniel observed as Emma stifled a yawn. "Thank you for today, Morgan. The exhibit was fascinating and dinner was lovely. I should be thanking you both. It's been—" Morgan paused, seemingly searching for the right words. "Refreshing. To experience something simply for the joy of discovery rather than strategic advantage." As they prepared to leave, a sudden spring shower erupted outside, rain pounding against the restaurant windows. The doorman approached their table with apologetic efficiency. "I'm afraid taxis are scarce at the moment due to the weather, Ms. Chase. I've called for a car service, but there's a 20-minute wait minimum." "We can wait in the lobby," Daniel began, but Morgan interrupted with an alternative. "My apartment is just upstairs. You're welcome to wait there until the car arrives. It would be more comfortable than the lobby, especially for Emma." The invitation to Morgan's private space represented another significant boundary crossing. Daniel hesitated, weighing propriety against practicality. Emma's sleepy presence tipped the balance. A tired 9-year-old in a formal lobby for 20 minutes seemed unnecessarily uncomfortable when a better option existed. That would be very kind if you're sure it's not an imposition. Morgan's penthouse occupied the building's entire top floor, the elevator opening directly into a spacious foyer of marble and muted lighting. The apartment extended in multiple directions, its scale impressive even to someone who couldn't see its full visual impact. Daniel oriented himself through acoustic feedback, the subtle echo of high ceilings, the dampened sound of plush carpeting, in some areas contrasting with the gentle resonance of hardwood in others. This is amazing. Emma's fatigue temporarily forgotten as she spun slowly in the entryway, taking in the surroundings. It's bigger than our whole apartment building. Not quite, but it is rather large for one person. Morgan led them through to what felt like a spacious living area. Please make yourselves comfortable. Would you like tea or coffee while we wait? Daniel settled onto what proved to be an exceptionally comfortable sofa, the leather soft beneath his fingertips. Coffee would be wonderful, thank you. As Morgan moved toward what he presumed was the kitchen, Emma wandered the space with the curious exploration of a child discovering a new world. Miss Morgan, you have so many books, and your piano is beautiful. Do you play? My parents insisted on lessons from age 5 through college. I rarely find time now, unfortunately. Morgan's voice carried from the kitchen the sound of coffee preparation, providing a domestic counterpoint to her usual executive presence. Feel free to explore, Emma. Nothing in the living room is fragile or off-limits. Daniel listened to Emma's delighted discoveries, her running commentary creating a verbal map of Morgan's private space. Daddy, there's a whole wall of windows. You can see forever. And there are photos on the piano. Is that your brother, Ms. Morgan? He looks like you around the eyes. The domestic scene unfolding, coffee brewing, Emma exploring conversation, flowing naturally between private spaces, created an intimacy none of them had anticipated when the day began. Daniel sensed Morgan's return before she spoke, the subtle change in air current and the scent of coffee preceding her. Cream and sugar. Her voice came from directly beside him, closer than strictly necessary for passing a cup of coffee. Just a little cream, thank you. Their fingers brushed as she handed him the cup, the brief contact, sending an unexpected current of awareness between them. Your home is beautiful from what Emma's enthusiastic descriptions suggest. It's architecturally impressive, but has always felt more like a showcase than a home. Morgan settled beside him on the sofa, the cushions shifting slightly under her weight. Efficient for entertaining business associates, less conducive to actual living. Emma had discovered Morgan's collection of geological specimens displayed in a glass cabinet. These rocks are amazing. Look at the colors in this one, Daddy. It's purple and green and sparkly all at once. That's fluorite from a mine in Illinois. Morgan explained, a new warmth entering her voice as she discussed something clearly personal rather than professional. Collecting minerals was my one rebellion against my parents' emphasis on practical achievements. They considered it frivolous, which naturally made it more appealing. Daniel smiled at this glimpse of a younger, defiant Morgan. We all find our small resistances. Mine was restoring vintage motorcycles. Impractical, occasionally dangerous, utterly absorbing. Do you miss it, the motorcycles? Morgan's question touched on the larger issue of what had been lost to his accident. Sometimes, but not as much as you might expect. Daniel sipped his coffee, considering how to explain the complex reality of his adapted life. After the initial grief passes, you realize that who you are isn't defined by what activities you can perform. The core of your identity, your values, your perspectives, your capacity for connection remains intact. Emma had moved to the piano, experimentally pressing keys to produce random notes. Morgan called to her gently, "Would you like me to play something?" "Yes, please." Emma abandoned her exploration and hurried back toward them. Morgan moved to the piano, and moments later the apartment filled with music. Not the rigid classical pieces her childhood training might suggest, but something more contemporary and emotionally resonant. Daniel hadn't anticipated this hidden talent, the technical precision infused with genuine feeling, creating an unexpected dimension to his understanding of her. The impromptu concert ended with a gentle, contemplative piece that faded into comfortable silence. Emma applauded enthusiastically. That was beautiful. Daddy, wasn't that amazing? Extraordinary, Daniel agreed, genuinely impressed. You play with remarkable sensitivity. Music was my parents' requirement, but finding my own expression within it became another small rebellion. Morgan returned to the sofa, sitting closer to Daniel than before. It's been months since I played for anyone. Thank you for being an appreciative audience. The doorman called to inform them their car had arrived, bringing their unexpected domestic interlude to a close. As they prepared to leave, Emma hugged Morgan impulsively. Thank you for the best day ever. Your house is amazing, but you know what's even better. You made Daddy smile all day. The real smile that reaches his eyes, not the polite one he uses when people are being weird about his cane. The innocent observation hung in the air between the adults as Emma collected her coat. Morgan's voice was softer than Daniel had ever heard it when she finally responded. That might be the nicest compliment I've ever received, Emma. In the elevator descending to the lobby, an unspoken recognition settled between them. Their relationship had evolved beyond professional collaboration, beyond casual friendship, into something neither had named but both increasingly valued. The day had revealed compatibility and connection neither had been seeking, but now couldn't ignore. The doorman held the building's entrance open as rain continued falling outside. Morgan walked them to the waiting car, her hand briefly touching Daniel's arm in a gesture that communicated more than words could efficiently express. Text me when you get home safely. The roads can be treacherous in this weather. And the simple request acknowledged mutual concern, the beginning of caring about each other's well-being beyond professional courtesy. I will. Thank you again for today. As the car pulled away from the curb, Emma leaned against Daniel's shoulder, fatigue finally overcoming her excitement. I really like Ms. Morgan, Daddy. She sees you the same way I do, not just your eyes, but all of you. The observation delivered with a child's unfiltered honesty crystallized what had been gradually emerging in Daniel's consciousness. Morgan Chase had indeed come to see him completely. His capabilities, his adaptations, his strengths and vulnerabilities, without reducing him to either his disability or his compensation for it. That perspective was vanishingly rare in his experience, a precious recognition of his whole self that most people seemed incapable of achieving. Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Daniel sent the promised text confirming their safe arrival home. Morgan's response came almost immediately. Thank you for sharing your day with me. Emma's perspective on the world is extraordinary, clearly influenced by your approach to life. You've created something remarkable together. The message acknowledged what Daniel valued most, his relationship with Emma and the resilient worldview they'd built together. That Morgan recognized and appreciated this core aspect of his identity felt more meaningful than any professional recognition could have been. As he prepared for bed, Daniel's phone chimed with another message from Morgan. Robert Hamilton has called an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. Topic undisclosed, but likely related to our department restructuring and your position. Wanted you to know in advance. We'll face whatever comes together. The corporate reality that had receded during their museum day reasserted itself abruptly, reminding Daniel of the complications awaiting them beyond this weekend interlude. Whatever connection they were developing existed within a complex professional context that couldn't be ignored or wished away. His response acknowledged both the practical concern and the emotional support underlying her warning. Thank you for the heads up. Whatever Robert's planning, I'm grateful to face it with you in my corner. The simple exchange balancing professional alliance with personal connection seemed to establish a new equilibrium between them, neither denying the growing personal dimension of their relationship nor allowing it to overshadow the professional challenges they still needed to navigate together. Monday morning brought dual challenges: the emergency board meeting Morgan had warned about and the parent-teacher conference at Emma's school. Daniel had expected to have to choose between them, but Morgan had rescheduled the board meeting to accommodate his family commitment, another small indication of her shifting priorities. Emma's school occupied a renovated historical building, its worn stone steps and high ceilings creating challenging acoustics for someone who relied heavily on sound for navigation. Daniel had memorized the layout months ago: 14 steps to the main entrance, left corridor to the administrative offices, right corridor to the classrooms. Today, however, an unexpected obstacle disrupted his mental map. I'm sorry, Mr. Foster, but the main hallway is blocked for floor waxing. You'll need to use the side entrance and go through the gymnasium. The security guard's directions were well-intentioned, but vague, leaving Daniel momentarily disoriented in the unfamiliar route. He was navigating the alternate route, his cane tapping against unfamiliar walls, when a child's voice called out from nearby. "Hey, it's Emma's dad, the blind guy." The comment wasn't malicious, simply the unfiltered observation of a young boy, but it was followed by another child's whisper, loud enough for Daniel to hear. "My mom says it's weird that Emma doesn't have a normal dad who can see her grow up." Daniel had developed thick skin about such comments years ago, but hearing them in Emma's school environment still stung. Children's remarks invariably reflected parental attitudes, which meant at least some of Emma's classmates were hearing similar sentiments at home. Ms. Martinez greeted him warmly when he finally located her classroom, her voice carrying the genuine enthusiasm of a teacher who truly saw his daughter's potential. "Mr. Foster, thank you for coming. I've asked Principal Grayson and Mrs. Matthews to join us shortly, but I wanted to speak with you privately first." The conference began with a detailed discussion of the incident that had prompted the meeting. According to Ms. Martinez, Emma had been defending Daniel against increasingly cruel comments from Tyler Matthews, a classmate whose mother served on the PTA board. Emma maintained remarkable composure until Tyler suggested that real fathers can see their children's faces. At that point, she became understandably upset. Ms. Martinez's voice carried both admiration for Emma's restraint and concern about the situation. She responded that being a father has nothing to do with eyesight and everything to do with being present and supportive. Daniel felt a complex mixture of pride and regret. His daughter shouldn't have to defend him, shouldn't have to carry the emotional burden of countering prejudice at her age. Has this been an ongoing issue? Unfortunately, yes. Tyler appears to be repeating attitudes he's hearing at home. Mrs. Matthews has made several comments during PTA meetings about special accommodations, creating disruptions for other students. Ms. Martinez's tone made it clear which parent was the true source of the problem. "I've addressed the bullying behavior directly with Tyler, but without parental reinforcement, these conversations have limited impact." Daniel nodded, recognizing the familiar pattern. Children rarely develop prejudice independently. They absorbed and reflected the attitudes modeled at home. "What's the purpose of today's meeting, then? Is Emma facing disciplinary action for defending herself?" "Absolutely not," Ms. Martinez assured him quickly. "Principal Grayson wants to address the situation comprehensively, including Mrs. Matthews' complaints about what she calls Emma's disruptive defensiveness. My concern is that this meeting might become confrontational in ways that don't serve Emma's best interests." Before Daniel could respond, a sharp knock at the door announced the arrival of Principal Grayson and Patricia Matthews. Daniel rose, turning toward the sound with practiced composure. The principal's voice was professionally neutral as he made introductions, but Mrs. Matthews' greeting carried the artificial warmth that barely masked underlying hostility. "Mr. Foster, thank you for making time for this important discussion about classroom harmony." Her tone suggested she was addressing someone with limited comprehension rather than a professional adult. "I'm sure we all want what's best for the children." Principal Grayson outlined the purpose of the meeting: to address the conflict between the children and establish a constructive path forward. However, Patricia Matthews quickly redirected the conversation. "While I understand Emma feels protective of her father's condition," she began. The slight pause emphasizing her discomfort with disability. Her reactions to innocent questions create an uncomfortable classroom environment. Children are naturally curious about differences. Daniel maintained his professional demeanor despite the growing anger beneath it. "There's a significant distinction between curious questions and deliberate cruelty, Mrs. Matthews. Based on Ms. Martinez's account, your son's remarks cross that line decisively." Patricia's voice hardened. Children repeat things without understanding their impact. Tyler was simply expressing what many parents have discussed privately, that your situation creates unnecessary complications for the children and the school. The constant accommodations, Emma's unusual social development, the disruption to normal classroom dynamics. The mask had dropped completely, revealing the prejudice Daniel had suspected from the beginning. "By my situation, I assume you mean my visual impairment, and by accommodations, you're referring to basic accessibility considerations that any school is legally required to provide. Don't twist my words with legal technicalities. I'm speaking as a concerned parent representing others who feel the same way." Patricia lowered her voice conspiratorially. Several families have discussed whether Emma might benefit from a more specialized environment and environment, somewhere with resources better suited to families with your particular challenges. The suggestion that Emma should be removed from her school because of his disability ignited a fury Daniel rarely allowed himself to express. His voice remained controlled, but carried an edge that left no doubt about his resolve. Mrs. Matthews, let me be absolutely clear. My daughter will remain at this school receiving the excellent education she deserves. Any attempt to suggest otherwise could be construed as discrimination against a family member of a person with a disability, something federal law takes quite seriously. Are you threatening legal action? Patricia's indignation was palpable. I'm simply stating facts. Daniel's grip tightened on his cane. What concerns me more than your prejudice is its impact on your son, who's learning to treat others with cruelty rather than understanding. Principal Grayson attempted to regain control of the increasingly heated discussion. Our goal here is to find a constructive solution that supports both children. Ms. Martinez has suggested implementing a classroom unit on diversity and inclusion that would benefit everyone. That seems like an excellent approach, Daniel agreed. Children need to understand that differences in ability aren't deficiencies. They're simply variations in how people experience the world. Patricia Matthews scoffed audibly. This is exactly the problem. We're expected to rearrange the entire educational environment to accommodate one person's limitations. My son shouldn't have to attend sensitivity training because someone else chose to enroll their child in a mainstream school, despite obvious challenges. The door opened unexpectedly, and a familiar voice entered the conversation. I apologize for the interruption. I'm Morgan Chase, a family friend of the Fosters. Her confident tone immediately commanded attention. Emma invited me to her science fair presentation, and I wanted to coordinate with Mr. Foster about the timing. The strategic intervention was delivered with such conviction that even Daniel momentarily questioned his own memory of their plans. Principal Grayson seemed startled by the presence of a recognizable CEO in his modest office. Ms. Chase, we're currently in a parent-teacher conference. Perhaps you could wait outside. Of course, I didn't realize. Morgan made no move toward the door. Though since I'm here, may I ask what this meeting concerns? Emma mentioned some classroom challenges when we spoke last weekend. Patricia Matthews' entire demeanor transformed at the unexpected presence of wealth and influence. We're discussing some minor misunderstandings between the children. Nothing serious. Interesting, Emma described it as bullying based on her father's disability, with suggestions that they didn't belong in the school community. Morgan's precise recall of details Emma must have shared during their dinner conversation left no doubt about her command of the situation. I'm particularly interested in the educational approach being taken, given that Apex Technologies funds several initiatives promoting disability inclusion in educational settings. The implied connection between corporate funding and the school's handling of the situation wasn't subtle. Principal Grayson straightened in his chair. So, Chase, I assure you that Lincoln Elementary takes inclusion and anti-bullying policies very seriously. This meeting is part of our commitment to addressing concerns promptly and thoroughly. Morgan nodded with practiced corporate diplomacy. I'm glad to hear it. Educational institutions that demonstrate commitment to these values often make excellent partners for our community investment programs. The entire dynamic of the meeting shifted in that moment. Patricia Matthews, suddenly aware that her campaign against Daniel might have implications beyond the classroom, backpedaled visibly. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm simply concerned about all the children having a positive learning environment. A concern we all share, Morgan agreed smoothly, which is why educational settings that actively counter discriminatory attitudes rather than enabling them are so essential. The remainder of the meeting proceeded with remarkable efficiency, concluding with Patricia's strained apology for any misunderstanding and Principal Grayson's commitment to implementing additional classroom discussions about diversity and inclusion. As they exited the building, Daniel finally addressed Morgan's unexpected intervention. Not that I'm complaining, but how exactly did you end up in that meeting? Morgan's steps slowed to match his pace. Emma texted me this morning about the mean lady who doesn't want her dad at school. She was worried about you facing them alone. The revelation that Emma had reached out to Morgan independently caught Daniel completely off guard. She has your number. When did that happen? I gave her my card at dinner, told her she could contact me if she ever had questions about technology or business. Morgan's voice carried a hint of uncertainty for the first time since Daniel had met her. I should have mentioned it to you. Professional habit. Exchanging contact information during meetings. I didn't expect her to use it for something like this. Daniel processed this new development. Emma had independently identified Morgan as a potential ally and resource, someone powerful enough to help in a situation where she feared her father might be vulnerable. The insight and strategic thinking behind that action were both impressive and slightly concerning for a 9-year-old. I'm not upset, just surprised. Daniel navigated around a bike rack as Kane finding the obstacle before Morgan could warn him. Though I'm curious about how you managed to get away from the office in the middle of a workday for a school meeting that wasn't even yours. CEO privilege. I told my assistant it was an emergency meeting about the future of technology education. Morgan's tone suggested she found the subterfuge more amusing than problematic. Technically not untrue considering what was at stake for Emma's educational experience. They reached Morgan's car, the driver waiting with the door open. Can I give you a ride back to the office? We still have the board meeting to prepare for this afternoon. Daniel accepted the offer, recognizing they had limited time to coordinate their strategy before facing Robert Hamilton and the board. As they drove toward Apex headquarters, Morgan briefed him on what she'd learned about Hamilton's agenda. He's focusing on financial justification, claiming your position represents unnecessary expenditure during market contraction. It's a transparent attempt to undermine my authority without directly challenging it. Morgan's strategic mind was already formulating their counter-approach. We'll need to present clear metrics demonstrating value creation that exceeds cost. Daniel nodded, immediately understanding the strategy. I've compiled data on communication inefficiencies between technical teams and executive leadership, quantifiable impacts on project timelines, budget overruns, feature misalignments. My position addresses these directly, with projected savings exceeding costs by a significant margin. Perfect. But we also need to address the unspoken issue, his implication that my judgment is compromised by personal factors. Morgan's voice carried the edge of someone who'd faced similar insinuations throughout her career. We'll acknowledge our professional relationship extends to mutual respect without either denying or overemphasizing the personal dimension. Their preparation continued throughout the journey, the car becoming a mobile strategic command center as they refined their approach. By the time they reached Apex, both felt ready for whatever confrontation awaited them. The boardroom fell silent as they entered together, 12 executives and board members arranged around the massive table with Robert Hamilton at its head. The theatrical arrangement wasn't accidental, positioning Robert as the authority figure with Morgan and Daniel entering as subjects rather than leaders. Morgan reclaimed control, immediately moving to her designated seat at the opposite end of the table with confident authority. Good morning, everyone. I understand Robert has called this emergency session regarding financial projections. Since my office prepared those projections, I've asked our technical documentation specialist to join us as he's been instrumental in translating complex technical dependencies into financial timelines. The framing was masterful, establishing Daniel's presence as professionally necessary rather than personally motivated, while subtly reminding everyone that Morgan's team had created the very financial data Robert intended to weaponize against her. Robert cleared his throat, his disapproval evident. Before we begin reviewing financials, I think it's important to address the organizational changes that impact these projections, specifically the creation of new executive-level positions during a period of projected market contraction. Sarah Thompson distributed folders containing what appeared to be personnel costs and departmental budgets. As you can see on page 3, we've added 3 new positions reporting directly to Ms. Chase in the past quarter, with compensation packages exceeding industry standards by approximately 20%. The strategy was becoming clear, positioning Morgan as fiscally irresponsible by focusing on expenses without addressing corresponding value creation. Daniel remained silent following Morgan's lead as she calmly opened her folder and reviewed the contents. Interesting framing, Sarah. You've isolated personnel costs without including the efficiency metrics these positions have already generated. Morgan's voice remained professional but carried an edge of challenge. Perhaps we should provide the board with complete information before drawing conclusions about fiscal responsibility. She distributed her own folders containing the data they'd prepared earlier that morning. You'll find documented communication failures between technical teams and executive leadership over the past year with quantified financial impact. The technical documentation specialist position, filled by Mr. Foster, directly addresses these inefficiencies with projected annual savings exceeding the position's cost by a factor of 5. The board members began reviewing the competing data sets, the room filling with the subtle sounds of turning pages and thoughtful consideration. Robert's strategy had encountered its first obstacle, empirical evidence contradicting his narrative of fiscal irresponsibility. Hamilton shifted tactics smoothly, his voice taking on a tone of paternal concern. The financial justification is certainly compelling, Morgan, but there's another aspect of these organizational changes that warrants discussion: the importance of maintaining appropriate professional boundaries within corporate leadership. The insinuation was clear, though carefully phrased to avoid explicit accusation. Morgan met it with equal indirection. I completely agree, Robert. Professional boundaries are essential to effective leadership. That's why I've insisted on rigorous qualification requirements and performance metrics for all positions regardless of reporting structure. And yet, Robert continued, certain appointments appear to be based on factors beyond objective qualification. The board has noticed an unusual level of personal involvement with particular employees. Attendance at school meetings, weekend outings, private dinners. Such involvement inevitably creates perception issues regarding objectivity and fair treatment. The accusation hung in the air, not quite explicit enough to be directly refuted, yet clear in its implication that Morgan's judgment was compromised by personal feelings toward Daniel. The strategy was designed to undermine her authority without providing a clear target for counterargument. Daniel felt the weight of multiple gazes shift toward him, evaluating his presence not as a professional contributor, but as evidence of Morgan's supposed compromise. The moment required a response that neither denied the personal dimension nor allowed it to overshadow professional value. Before Morgan could respond, Daniel spoke for the first time since entering the room. If I may address the underlying concern directly. His calm voice drew attention immediately. The insinuation seems to be that Ms. Chase's judgment regarding my position is compromised by personal factors rather than business necessity. Robert's discomfort at the direct acknowledgement was evident in his shifting posture. We're simply noting that unusual personal involvement might create the appearance of favoritism regardless of intent. An understandable concern. Daniel's tone remained professional despite the personal attack disguised as corporate protocol, which is why I'd like to address it explicitly rather than allowing it to remain an unspoken subtext to this discussion. The directness caught several board members by surprise, their attention fully engaged as Daniel continued. Ms. Chase and I have indeed developed a productive professional relationship that extends to mutual respect on a personal level. This isn't unusual in effective business partnerships. Trust and understanding enhance communication rather than compromising it. He opened his tablet, activating the screen reader function that allowed him to access his prepared data. What should concern this board isn't whether colleagues occasionally interact outside office hours, but whether those interactions enhance or diminish business outcomes. The metrics in your folders demonstrate unequivocally that our collaboration has already improved communication efficiency between technical teams and executive leadership. One of the board members, an older woman Daniel recognized as the former CEO of a major technology firm, spoke up for the first time. Mr. Foster makes an excellent point. I've always found that the most effective executive teams develop relationships based on mutual respect and understanding that transcend purely transactional interactions. The question isn't whether such relationships exist, but whether they contribute positively to business outcomes. The intervention created a visible shift in the room's dynamics, other board members nodding in agreement. Robert's attempt to weaponize personal connection against professional judgment was losing momentum. Morgan seized the opening with characteristic efficiency. Dr. Winters raises the essential question: does my working relationship with Mr. Foster, whatever its nature, produce better business outcomes? The data clearly demonstrates it does. Communication failures between technical teams and executive leadership have decreased 42% since implementing the new structure, with corresponding improvements in project timelines and budget adherence. The discussion shifted toward the empirical evidence, Robert's insinuations giving way to practical assessment of organizational effectiveness. As the meeting progressed, Daniel observed the gradual transformation of the board's perspective, from suspicious scrutiny of personal motives to impressed evaluation of measurable results. By the time Morgan concluded her presentation, the original accusatory atmosphere had dissipated entirely. Robert attempted one final redirection. While the short-term metrics are impressive, I remain concerned about the precedent we're setting regarding reporting structures and personal entanglements within leadership. Dr. Winters responded before Morgan could, her experienced voice carrying the weight of decades in corporate governance. Robert, I've served on boards for 30 years, and I've seen far more damage done by rigid hierarchical structures that prevent effective communication than by leaders who develop genuine working relationships across organizational levels. Ms. Chase's approach appears to be yielding exactly the results we've been requesting: better alignment between technical capabilities and executive decisions. The meeting concluded with a formal vote affirming Morgan's organizational changes, including Daniel's position reporting directly to her. As board members filed out of the room, several stopped to introduce themselves to Daniel, expressing interest in his unique perspective on technical communication. When the room finally emptied except for Morgan and Daniel, the professional composure they'd maintained throughout the confrontation softened into shared relief. Morgan closed her laptop with a decisive click. That went significantly better than I anticipated, Dr. Winter's intervention was unexpected, but perfectly timed. Daniel gathered his materials, organizing them with practiced efficiency. She essentially validated our entire argument about professional relationships transcending purely transactional interactions. She's been a mentor since I became CEO. Her support isn't surprising, but her explicit endorsement of relationships that extend beyond corporate hierarchy was unexpected. Morgan moved closer, her voice lowering slightly. Though it does raise a question we've been carefully avoiding in all our preparation. Daniel understood immediately. The actual nature of our relationship beyond professional collaboration. Exactly. We've defended the value of our working relationship convincingly, but we haven't really defined what exists alongside it. Morgan's usual decisive confidence gave way to rare uncertainty. Saturday at the museum dinner at my apartment, those weren't purely professional interactions. The acknowledgement hung between them, neither willing to retreat from the truth, nor entirely ready to define its implications. Daniel chose his words carefully. I value what's developing between us, Morgan. The connection we've established, the understanding that goes beyond workplace collaboration. But I'm also aware of the complications, professional boundaries, Emma's well-being, the external perceptions we just spent a meeting defending against. All valid considerations that deserve thoughtful navigation rather than impulsive decisions. Morgan's analytical mind approached even emotional territory with characteristic thoroughness. But they're considerations to be addressed, not barriers that preclude possibility. The statement contained both acknowledgement of complexity and openness to potential, a perfectly balanced response that neither pressured nor retreated. Daniel felt a surge of appreciation for her approach, so aligned with his own careful consideration of significant decisions. Then perhaps we continue as we have been, allowing our connection to develop naturally while maintaining appropriate professional boundaries and being mindful of Emma's place in the equation. Daniel proposed the middle path that honored both their growing feelings and the legitimate complexities surrounding them. Morgan's agreement came with unexpected warmth. A sensible approach with one addition: explicit acknowledgement between us that we're navigating something meaningful rather than pretending it doesn't exist. The conversation marked a turning point, not a dramatic declaration or impulsive commitment, but a mature recognition of emerging feelings within a complex reality. As they left the boardroom together, their professional victory complemented by personal understanding, Daniel felt a sense of possibility he hadn't experienced since before his accident. The prospect of connection that honored rather than ignored the complexities of his life. 6 months later, Daniel stood backstage at the district science fair listening to the animated conversations of students and parents preparing their presentations. Emma was making final adjustments to their Jupiter model, which had evolved significantly since their initial design. The textured surface now incorporated additional features based on recent NASA data, and Emma had added a recorded narration that explained the model's dual visual and tactile elements. "Are you nervous, Daddy?" Emma's voice contained the excited tension of a child about to perform on stage. A little, Daniel admitted, adjusting his tie. Public speaking isn't my favorite activity. But you're amazing at explaining things. Remember at the museum when everyone gathered around to hear you talk about screen readers? Emma's confidence in him never wavered. Besides, Morgan said she'd be sitting in the front row, so you can just pretend you're talking to her. Daniel smiled at the mention of Morgan, who had become an increasingly important presence in their lives over the past months. Their relationship had evolved gradually, carefully, with thoughtful consideration of both professional boundaries and Emma's well-being. Weekend outings had become regular occurrences, followed by shared dinners that extended into evenings of conversation after Emma went to bed. Morgan had learned to navigate their apartment with the same consideration Daniel showed in her penthouse, adapting to their routines while bringing her own perspective into their lives. Mr. Foster, the science fair coordinator, approached them. You and Emma are up next. Are you ready? As ready as we'll ever be, Daniel replied, taking Emma's hand as they moved toward the stage. Let's show them what different perspectives can create together. Their presentation was a seamless collaboration. Emma describing the visual elements while Daniel explained the tactile features, both demonstrating how their different ways of experiencing the world had combined to create something neither could have accomplished alone. The audience response was enthusiastic, with particular interest in how their approach might be applied to other educational contexts. As they concluded to generous applause, Daniel heard Morgan's distinctive voice asking a question from the front row. What advice would you give to other families or teams looking to collaborate across different abilities? Emma answered with characteristic directness. Don't think about what someone can't do. Focus on what they can do differently. Daddy taught me that everyone has unique ways of understanding things, and when you combine them, you get something better than anyone could make alone. The judges awarded them first place in the innovation category, citing their creative approach to inclusive design and scientific accuracy. As they accepted the award, Emma whispered excitedly, "We did it, Daddy. Our different ways of seeing really did make something better." After the ceremony, they met Morgan in the lobby, where she waited with congratulatory flowers for Emma. Those were the most impressive storm systems I've ever seen on a Jupiter model. NASA should hire you both immediately. Emma beamed with pride. The judges said our approach could help other students learn science in different ways. Maybe we could work with your company to make more models like this. That's actually an excellent idea, Morgan replied thoughtfully. Apex has been looking for educational outreach projects. This could be the perfect pilot program. As they walked toward the parking lot, Emma skipping ahead with her award certificate and flowers, Morgan slipped her hand into Daniel's with the comfortable familiarity that had developed between them. She was magnificent up there. You both were. She makes it easy, Daniel replied. Her confidence never wavers even when she's standing in front of hundreds of people. Like her father, Morgan's voice carried the warmth of personal knowledge. You've built something extraordinary together, and now you're sharing it with others. That's a rare gift. Speaking of gifts, Daniel said, his voice softening. Emma's birthday is next month. She's been hinting rather obviously that she'd like you to be part of our traditional celebration dinner. I'd be honored, Morgan squeezed his hand gently. Though I should warn you, I've already ordered a telescope that's probably inappropriate for a 10-year-old. Daniel laughed. Perfect. She'll be tracking Jupiter's moons by summer. As they reached Morgan's car, Emma already chattering with the driver about their award, Daniel felt a moment of profound gratitude for the unexpected path his life had taken. What had begun as a tense boardroom confrontation had evolved into something neither he nor Morgan could have anticipated, a connection that recognized and valued their differences rather than seeking to minimize them. Emma turned towards them, her voice carrying across the parking lot. Are we still getting celebration ice cream? Morgan promised we could try all the flavors and make a scientific ranking system. Absolutely, Morgan called back. A proper scientific investigation requires thorough data collection. Daniel smiled, hearing the joy in both their voices. You realize you've created a monster with these scientific dessert investigations, right? The best kind of monster, Morgan replied, her tone conveying more than the casual words. The kind that sees the world differently and makes it better for everyone else in the process. As they joined Emma at the car, the three of them forming what had become a familiar unit, Daniel reflected on how profoundly his understanding of vision had changed. In losing much of his physical sight, he'd gained a deeper perception, one that recognized connection capability and possibility, where others saw only limitation. And in Morgan, he'd found someone who saw the world with that same clarity, recognizing that the most valuable perspective wasn't about what the eyes could see, but what the heart could understand. "Ready for ice cream, research team?" Morgan asked as they settled into the car. "Ready," Emma confirmed enthusiastically. "Absolutely." Daniel agreed, his hand finding Morgan's in the space between them. "I can't think of anywhere else I'd rather be."